Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I think Mr. Durbin's audio is still connecting, but we'll do a sound check for him in a moment. This is the afternoon of the third day of the, let me try that one again. Today is October 28, 2022. It's just after 1:30 p.m. This is the afternoon of the third day of hearing in the Administrative Hearings Office proceeding on the court's reference to the Statewide Resource Control Board in City of Marina versus RMC Lonestar. We don't need to have appearances. Everyone appears to be the same as who was here this morning. So with that, Mr. Durbin, doing a sound check. Can we hear you?
I hope I'm here.
I hear you fine. Good. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start. We'll try to do this as efficiently as we can on a Friday afternoon. So first of all, Mr. Leffler, were you able to do your noontime homework assignments? First of all, were you able to find the figure showing the drawdown, I guess it was contours around the Kona Depression?
Yes, I think I was able to find the figure that I was looking for amongst the 4,000 pages or so of the EIR.
Good. It's so, first of all, I don't know if you or your attorney can identify, is that an exhibit number that's already been submitted with Cal-Am's exhibits?
I believe it's exhibit number 105.
Oh. Let me just check. Did Cal-Am just submit that yesterday, I guess? Okay, well, I'll ask maybe Ms. Mullen can screen share exhibit Cal-Am. Is it Cal-Am 105 we're looking for?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, so yeah, Ms. Mullen, can you please screen share that exhibit? We'll see if we can get it.
Okay, and then I believe we want to go to page 8.2-46.
Okay, Cal-Am.
Which should maybe PDF page 46, hopefully. Okay, yeah, that's the figure. So just to explain this a little bit, so this is like a cross section through the the bottom part's through the capture zone. The top part shows just simply an inland gradient with no pumping. So you can see the arrows there showing the direction of groundwater flow. And then if you go to the bottom figure, a well is introduced in creating drawdown and the capture zone. And so the capture zone is, I believe it's labeled there, inland extent of capture zone, the vertical line. And so in the bottom figure, you can see that there's a dashed line that represents that inland gradient in the figure above. And then the drawdown would, as shown with the double-headed arrow there, is the drawdown that occurs due to the pumping of the well. So what you can see from this is that in the bottom figure, in the dashed line, showing just an inland gradient, and then in the solid line below that, it shows the cone of depression and how that, you have to get to a certain point of drawdown to overcome the inland gradient to pull the water back to the pumping well. And then you still have some drawdown outside of the capture zone. And just a couple quick caveats on this figure. So first of all, it's not to scale vertically or horizontally. I know there's kind of some features labeled there across the top, but it's really not, representative. Overall, this gives the impression that there's, the proportion of drawdown outside the capture zone relative to inside is, more than what it really, really is. So I would my caution is to just use this as, just sort of a general schematic and illustrate the principle, but it shouldn't be used for looking at proportions of drawdown inside and outside. I think we've provided some other figures that speak to that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that, in particular, because we have this ocean recharge boundary, that the amount of drawdown outside the capture zone is less if you go south along the coast, along the ocean boundary than it is, say, on the inland side. So I think with that, if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that explanation. So I do have a follow-up question. And I certainly understand there's a large vertical exaggeration in these figures. But the bottom figure does show, I'll say to the right of the cone of depression, that the groundwater is lower than it was under the, I'll say, the without project condition. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, that reflects the amount of drawdown, that you might have outside the capture zone that might be on the order of a foot or so, a foot or less in a certain direction outside the capture zone.
Okay, so my question is, would that additional drawdown, even if it's small, could that induce additional seawater intrusion over the base case, the without project case, basically with seawater flowing around the capture zone or around the cone of depression to that area of increased drawdown?
So that goes to the point of what the drawdowns are outside the capture zone south along the coast, which I think in one of my other diagrams shows that to be less than a foot. So I think that certainly there's going to be a little bit of bending of the flow paths. So of course you've got inland flow happening without the project and seawater intrusion occurring. And then you'll get some bending of the flow lines, which the bending actually slows down the flow of water, just outside the capture zone. So I think that, that would be, if there is any, that would be, a negligible amount.
And as we said here, if you can't find it, I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Sorry, yeah, no, I'm sorry. I meant to say that, that area outside the capture zone is already seawater intruded, of course. So it's not going to expand the extent of seawater intrusion. And in fact, I think as a hydrofocus work showed that if anything, there's a beneficial effect on that. And I think an important point that hasn't come out yet is, to the extent that this type of project has a beneficial effect, which means that it either retards the inland movement of the seawater intrusion front or pulls it back a little bit, you actually would have a decrease in TDS concentrations and salinity in those areas along the seawater intrusion front.
Okay, but if there is some additional, in areas where there is some additional drawdown along the coast, there will be some, maybe small, but some additional seawater intrusion. Is that correct?
Well, again, I don't know that I would call it additional seawater intrusion because it's already, intruded and has very high concentrations. But
okay, well, maybe I'll restate. Would there be additional flow of seawater to the landward aquifers because of this drawdown?
Yeah, I think, virtually all of that would occur within the capture zone. It would be only a negligible amount outside.
Okay, and you said that you have some other figures that show the drawdowns south of the wells along the coast. Do you happen to know where those are? If you don't, it's okay, but if you can give me a citation, it helps me.
Let's see. Just a moment.
I believe it might be even in the slides.
Well, if you can check, if that would be helpful. If you can find it, if not, it's okay.
Yeah, it's in either in my testimony or my appendix. Yeah, I think one example. Yeah, I think in my actually rebuttal testimony appendix.
Okay, I think that's Cal Am 79, is that right? Yeah, let's put up Cal Am 79 and tell us what page to go to.
So well, it's a figure actually, or a series of figures. And looking at figure 7A as one example.
Okay, we'll I think we can get there pretty quickly. It's looks like it'll be PDF page. Why don't you go to about page 90, Miss Mullen? I think we can get there pretty quickly. Okay, scroll down. We have to go maybe 10 more pages down. We'll get to figure 7A eventually. Okay, keep going. That's figure one. So about 6 or 7 pages down from there. Okay, bingo, one more page. Okay, now we've got figure 7A. If you can just make it one notch smaller so we can see the whole thing. Great, thank you. So, okay, Mr. Lefter, go ahead and now you've got the figure in front of us. So let's go ahead if you want to say anything further.
Yeah, so this figure is showing in the blue are the drawdown contours. So the outer one is 1 foot. And then in the other colors are the capture zones. So if you look to the south there along the coast, you can see that the drawdown outside the capture zone is less than 1 foot. Okay,
so there's some drawdown that presumably would extend all the way to the coast, but less than 1 foot.
Right.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. All right. Well, that's all I had on that question. Were you able to do the calculations I talked about? Ms. Mullen, you can go ahead and take down that slide. Were you able to do the calculations we discussed before noon?
Yes.
And please just tell us your results of that. Start with did you do them separately for the dune sand aquifer and the 180-foot aquifer?
No, I did them together, but we can do a rough approximation here.
Okay.
Because I think the 180 is a little bit thicker than the dune sand. So I just did a very, rough ballpark initial calculation, taking 370 acres as the area. And well, before I go through this, one thing to mention is I believe that, not necessarily the entirety of the CMEX property is within all the capture zones. But that just a side point.
Okay.
So, but taking the whole area of the CMEX property, 370 acres, and there's about a 200-foot thickness of both aquifers combined down to the 180, 400 aquitard. And so multiplying 370 acres times 200 feet gives 74,000 acre feet of sediment volume, like the entire volume of, the sediment and the water together. And
I'm sorry, I was writing fast. Get you how much? 7? I can say that number again.
74,000 acre feet.
Okay.
As a total volume.
Okay.
And then multiplying by a specific yield. So for example, if we use 0.15 for the specific yield, that would yield 11,100 acre feet of water volume.
Okay. And do you have any opinion if the slant well started operation at full capacity, of that water volume, how much are they likely to pump in the first year?
So I believe the 15.5 MGD translates to a little bit over 17,000 acre feet per year. And so I think that kind of goes to, obviously it's sort of a transient feature. And I don't, have the exact numbers for, exactly how that will go in a transient nature. But, just based on the raw numbers of, 17,000 acre feet pumping volume and, 11,000 or, a couple thousand either way, volume that, roughly after a year or so of pumping, that, a large portion of, or most of that may be removed.
Okay, so it would be removed and primarily replaced with seawater then, is that right?
Right. The CMEX site, of course, is right next to the ocean boundary there. And so you would develop the flow paths coming in from the ocean. And I think one of the important things too is that to keep in mind is that, within the capture zone, the amount of flow coming from, different areas is very different depending on the difference in or the gradient or the difference in the heads between the ocean and the location and the distance, the flow path. So what I'm trying to say is just offshore of the slant wells, where in the ocean, of course, is a constant level, and then the greatest drawdown is right where the wells are pumping, you have a steep gradient and a very short flow path. But on the very margins of the capture zone, you have, a lot less drawdown. So you have a shallower gradient and you have a much longer flow path because it kind of winds its way along the outer edge of that capture zone boundary. So the vast majority of flow is going to kind of be through the central part of that capture zone.
That's why I was wondering, I was a little surprised when you said most of the 11,000 would be pumped in the first year, because it seems like with the flow paths you just described, even in the first year, a substantial portion of the 17,000 acre feet of total pumping would be flow directly from the ocean rather than from that 11,000 roughly acre feet of water that's there now.
Well, yeah, so that's a good point. Let's back up. So it's a transient, there's a transient nature to all this. So initially, and that's why the ocean water percentage, so we're talking like days and months here. And so when you first turn it on, you're going to have your lowest ocean water percentage because you have the most amount that's coming from directly beneath the property, CMEX property on shore, which has, high concentrations of salinity, but not, well, except right at the coast, it decreases slowly as you go inland. So you're going to be extracting initially more of the existing water that's, let's say, at 26,000 TDS and less of the seawater, because you've got to establish those flow paths from the ocean to the wells, and that takes some time. And so, yes, initially you would be extracting more water from beneath the property and less from the ocean, but then that would fairly rapidly, days, months, change to being primarily from the ocean.
Okay. So I mean, that to me, what you're just saying is that whole 11,000 probably would not be pumped in the first year. I mean, if you're saying days to months, it's only a few thousand acre feet per month. And then you're saying the flow paths would already be primarily from the ocean.
Yeah, I think I say, approximately after a year or so.
Okay.
I think you would, I'm not necessarily saying all of it would be pumped out within 1 year, but, a significant volume would be.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate your responding to those 2 points on relatively short notice. I do have a couple of questions for Dr. Ye. And first of all, Dr. Ye, I am concerned I haven't been pronouncing your name right, and I certainly want to get it right. Do you go by yay or ye?
Yeah.
Yay. Okay, good. I think I've been getting it right, but if not, let me know. So if we can, Ms. Mullen, if you can post Exhibit Caliam 89 and go to PDF page 48. This is a figure that was discussed yesterday. And then zoom in on the middle figure at the top, which says layer 2, that one. Okay, good. So, Dr. Ye, do you remember discussing this figure yesterday in response to questions from the attorneys?
Yes.
Okay. The question my staff asked me about is in the right side, kind of the right center side of that rectangle, there's a line with 2 arrows to it that say 0.03. Do you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
And please tell us what that is.
That's just a very thin, very thin area, small area, representing like the bluff of that elevation for the flow toward the east.
Do you know what material, what geologic materials that are in the area that's depicted by this line in this model?
It's not a actual material. It's really like that elevate bluff. You know, there's no direct connection, so it's kind of assumed model cell. So just one model cell.
Okay, and why did you put it in there? I mean, if it doesn't necessarily correspond to any real geologic feature, you know, I'm puzzled as to why it should be in the model.
Yeah, just allow the flow from that perched aquifer flow toward east. It's connected to that.
Okay. And then I see if we can just scroll over. Well, actually, before we scroll over, so was this was the 0.03 number a number you developed during the model calibration process?
Right. Yes.
Okay. All right. And then if we can just scroll over to the figure to the right for layer 3, I see the 0.3 is in here as well, and this is in the layer 3 is for the aquitard. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Those
So
are the FOSVA. Yeah.
Okay. So if you could please elaborate, why is this 0.03 what I'm going to call line in layer 3 as well?
Yeah. That's still in that area elevate location.
Okay. Would this, to the extent there's any geology related to this line in layers 2 and 3, would that affect the eastward extent of the capture zone from the Caliam slant wells because of this low conductivity?
No, because east of that FOSVA for model layer 2 and 3, the water level, they all below that water level in the FOSVA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The capture zones are in lower layers.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, and then Dr. Ye, while we're on you can go ahead and put down this figure in a small one. Thank you. Just in general regarding the 2022 North Marina groundwater model, Did you do sensitivity analysis, any sensitivity analysis for specific storage?
We adjust that during the model calibration, but it's not sensitive to the model residuals. So then we use all the value used by hydrofocus.
Okay. And the same question for specific yield. Did you adjust that during calibration or do a sensitivity analysis for that?
Yes, same as storativity, yeah.
Okay, so you adjusted that during the calibration, is that correct?
Correct.
And then you did not do a sensitivity analysis for specific yield.
We adjust that, then we change back the value hydrofocus used.
Oh, so does that mean you did a sensitivity analysis for specific yield or not?
Yes, for the model calibration, yes.
Oh, okay, for calibration, okay. Okay. So, Mr. Durbin, I'm going to turn to you and ask Ms. Mullen to put up Exhibit CalAm 73 and go to PDF page 33, Figure 1. Okay, Mr. Durbin, I'm sure you're familiar with this. This shows the area for the regional model. My question is, do you remember what recharge value or range of recharge value you used for the part of this model area that's near the coast, basically in the NMGWM boundary area?
Yeah, there's not a single value, and just excuse me. There are values that depend upon land use, and there's the three types of land use that are considered. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you can keep going. Keep going, yeah.
Okay, I lost my phone line. There are three land use types. There's the irrigated agriculture, urban, and the native cover. And the recharge for the individual types of land use depend upon the consumptive use of the vegetation cover, whether it be natural vegetation, no vegetation, irrigated agriculture, landscaping. It depends on the precipitation, and it depends upon soil characteristics. And so there's, given these different land types, there's quite a range of value. For instance, in the native vegetation areas, in the general area of concern, the recharge rate is something on the order, maybe an average of 4 inches per year or something like that. And of course, in the agricultural, and that's due to solid precipitation. In the agricultural areas, there's the water inputs are the combination of applied irrigation water and precipitation. And I believe that the averages are of deep percolation are maybe around a foot or between a foot and 2 feet. And then in the urban areas, the landscape irrigation, I think has something in the order of a foot of recharge, but those are spatial and temporal averages. So every month is different, and different areas within a land use type are different. No, excuse me, that is not correct. Within a land use type, the precipitation is the same, and so there's a within a land use type, there's the same infiltration everywhere.
Okay, and is this model a monthly time step?
Yes, it is.
So then I assume you have a recharge value for what, these different characteristics you described for each month. Is that correct? And then do the recharge values vary year to year in the modeling simulation?
Mhm.
Yes.
I assume that's depending on historical precipitation?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So Ms. Mullen, if you can scroll down to PDF page 41 in this same file. And Mr. Durbin, I assume you recognize this figure as well?
I do.
This is something that was bugging us. It does not look like you have well, let me just ask it. I can't tell for sure. We couldn't tell for sure. Are there dots here for the Marina Coast Water District wells?
Yes.
Okay, so are those, I assume they're, well, let me just ask. It's dangerous for me to assume. Can you sort of tell me generally where those wells are? And maybe in reference to the red rectangle might help.
Well, they're in the southeast quadrant or of the red area.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. And Ms. Mullen, you may take that down. Okay, I'm going to now shift to my last topic, which is superposition model or approach. And I'll ask Ms. Mullen, please put up exhibit Calm 3 and go to page 10. And paragraph 30, if you can scroll up to it. Okay, so for Mr. Leffler, at lines 5 through 7, the sentence states here, HydroFocus addressed the model improvement suggestions made by LBNL and used the superposition modeling approach for the CEQA analysis. Do you see that?
Mhm.
You have to go off mute though.
Sorry. Yes, I see that.
So what is a superposition modeling approach?
Well, I thought, I could describe it, but I think Tim Durbin could maybe describe it better than me.
That's why we have a panel. Mr. Durbin, you're on the hook. It's a good thing we didn't let you go yesterday. Please describe what a superposition model approach is.
I might say I'm hoping I get through this while the bar is still open.
Yeah, okay.
One of the things I'd like to do is the superposition and its alternatives are ultimately tied up in the model calibration. And I would like to go through a little bit of description of what I think are the important issues within the model calibration, and then go to your question about superposition.
Okay, go ahead. If that's how you think it's easiest to explain it.
First of all, it really starts with wanting to know about the model reliability, the reliability of the predictions that are made with the model, and consequently, the important elements of model uncertainty are those that impact the predictions. And in getting at a quantification of the impacts on the predictions, there's two steps. They're connected, but somewhat separated or independent of one another. The first is what I would call model calibration, and that's, as we're all familiar, is using some process to identify model parameters such as hydraulic conductivity or specific yield or whatever the variables of concern are in the calibration. And the second step has to do with the assessment of the predictive reliability, because the model calibration does not yield information on model predictability. And what the model calibration does yield, of course, are parameter values, but also the uncertainty levels in the ultimate parameter estimates. So if we estimate hydraulic conductivity for a certain area within the model and a certain model layer, the calibration process, if done to completion, yields how uncertain is that value. If maybe the calibration was for 25 feet, but in reality, maybe it's 10 feet or 35 feet, and the model calibration process quantifies that. That quantification involves and the model calibration in general involves sensitivities, something we call that mathematically refer to the sensitivity matrix. And the sensitivities of interest here are the sensitivities of the computed water levels at the locations of the measured groundwater levels, or the calibration targets, with respect to a change in a particular parameter value. And that's in a sense, that's something that is fundamental to the calibration process. That same sensitivity matrix is then used in a different quantification process to derive the uncertainty in the estimated values, just as I described a moment ago in the example of hydraulic conductivity. But at that point, we have our parameter estimates. We have estimates of the uncertainty in the parameters. but that in itself does not tell us anything about the uncertainty in the model predictions. And that's this second step. And that second step involves another sensitivity matrix, but this one is the sensitivity of the model predictions regarding some prediction of interest with respect to the parameter values. So as for the calibration, the parameter values are involved, but here the sensitivity matrix is different. And again, one focusing on the target calibration wells, the other sensitivity matrix in the second step, the uncertainty or the sensitivities of the prediction estimates of interest. And those prediction estimates and things of concern could be, just an example, the distance from the project wells to the 1 foot contour line of drawdown, or it could be to the drawdown, let's say the Marina coast wells, or the ocean water percentage. So we're looking at quite different sensitivities than in the calibration process. And again, using those sensitivities and the uncertainty in the parameter values, you can calculate the uncertainty in whatever your prediction of interest might be. So that's sort of how I would summarize calibration. I think the important takeaway is that the calibration process in itself does not yield any information on the predictive reliability in the model. You have to go to the second step. Some years ago, in the USGS, I did a study that examined the predictive reliability versus the standard error of the residuals from the calibration. And in this particular study that I did, demonstrated that you can have what appears to be a perfect fit with the of the model to the measured groundwater levels, but still have a high degree of uncertainty in the results. And it's just one example of that you cannot use the statistics on the residuals to assess the predictive reliability of the model. So that's some of the thoughts here that I wanted to start with respect to superposition. And I might mention, I was going to go over some sort of general things about superposition, and I think that Mr. Leffler was going to then talk specifically about superposition with respect to the analysis of the Monterey Peninsula water supply project. Superposition is a way of taking what appears to be a complex situation and translate it into a simple or less complex analysis. And superposition is applied with respect to almost always what's the incremental change in a groundwater system due to an incremental change in some input to the groundwater system. So one might ask, what is the drawdown that is caused just by pumping a particular well? Now, one could get at that with one of two ways. One is to run a model twice, one with the new pumping and one without, and to simply subtract the two, and you have the change in water levels due to the new pumping and the isolated effects of the new pumping. I might mention at this point too that while most of the applications of superposition relate to groundwater level changes, it equally applies to changes in particle tracks. So that if let's use actually the Salinas Valley and the edge of the seawater intrusion area, and that edge is moving in various directions and sort of moving throughout time. And one might ask, how will the movement of the intrusion front change with respect to pumping? And again, one could construct or run two models, one without the pumping and one with, and do particle tracking and derive what the change in the position would be. So by that subtraction of the two simulations, you're not getting the particle tracks, but the change in the particle tracks due to the pumping. Well, it turns out that you can use superposition to go directly to that change calculation and simply run the model once for the in the superposition formulation with the new pumping and with particle tracking, just to see what that isolated effect is. Now, superposition in its strictest form applies to what are described as linear systems. And for a groundwater model, a linear system would be one that, say, had only specified pumping, specified flux boundary conditions, specified head boundary conditions. That was such a model would be described as linear. However, if you have things that make models nonlinear are things such as modeling a stream aquifer interactions, or modeling
I'm sorry,
the
what? Aquifer interaction?
stream aquifer
Oh, okay.
interaction.
Okay, thank you.
And the mathematics of how that's represented in model creates nonlinearity in a model. Nonlinearity is also created if the aquifer thickness changes with time. It is nonlinear if you're modeling the depth of phreatic vegetation, where the discharge rate depends upon the depth to groundwaters. As it turns out, many systems that one would say strictly are not linear are in effect linear with respect to applying superposition. And there are a couple. One of the easier ones to deal with is the change in the thickness of the groundwater system. That if it's small with respect to the overall thickness, it's probably effectively a linear system. I actually, in some of my work over the last few years, have written some papers on how actually you can extend superposition formally to apply superposition in a strict sense. And there was one paper I did in 2008, and I have another paper that's been approved for publication and just waiting for the galley proofs for that. Now, superposition is a long established approach to solving groundwater problems. I think in the list of references in my 2008 paper, I refer to a USGS paper by an author, Riley, where they describe or sort of a tutorial on how and when to apply superposition. But there's also a number of what I would consider some important applications that demonstrate sort of the kinds of things that superposition can be used for. The Idaho Department of Water Resources administers groundwater and surface water rights in the Snake River Plain. And the Snake River is connected hydraulically to the groundwater system. And they use a superposition model to do their daily, I believe, administration on the river on respect to calls.
This is probably getting into more detail than we need. The takeaways are, I understand superposition is basically by running two scenarios, a with and without some condition, and comparing the results. And that as long as the system is linear, this is an appropriate way to estimate the impacts of a particular action, and that at least for this system, it's sufficiently linear that superposition is appropriate. So is there anything more in background that you need to say, or does that pretty much cover it?
No, I think that there's one point. First of all, or 2 points. Superposition eliminates the need for doing 2 simulations, and you get the answer with a single simulation. I think
Wait.
maybe
Now you're totally confusing me. Because I thought superposition was running 2 different simulations and comparing the differences.
No, I gave that as a way that one could identify the impacts of a project, was to do 2 simulations, but you can use superposition to do a single simulation. And furthermore, the superposition simulation does not involve the need to have any knowledge of boundary conditions or initial conditions. It only requires having estimates of the aquifer parameters.
Okay, well then I guess I'm confused. So it sounds like this is something significantly different than running the model with 2 different scenarios.
It is, and it's the feature that I just described is a handy one in that in a groundwater basin that has lots of people pumping and irrigating and doing various things. I don't need to know what the recharge is from that pumping or the pumping itself. I only need to know the pumping rate of the say of our well of interest, and I don't need to. There's a thing I don't need to know the boundary conditions on the groundwater system. I don't need to know the initial conditions that might apply here.
Okay, so then and I'm sorry if I interrupted, but I guess what either you or one of the other witnesses needs to explain. I guess it was Hydrofocus that did this first, but how did they take the North Marina groundwater model 2016 and turn it into what sometimes is called a superposition model and sometimes it's called a superposition approach?
Yeah, maybe.
I think Mr. Leffler is the person to answer that. My intent here was just to try to give some sort of background on the nature of superposition.
Okay, well, before we turn back to Mr. Leffler, Mr. Durbin, is there I didn't see anything in any of the CalAm exhibits, any write-up that describes this superposition modeling approach. And I'll ask you or Mr. Leffler, is it described in any of the CalAm exhibits?
Yeah, I was gonna, I'm sorry, go
ahead, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to go through a couple exhibits.
Okay, why don't you do that? Because I am maybe starting to understand what Mr. Durbin. I mean, I understand what Mr. Durbin said, but I still don't understand the next step or the mechanics of how a groundwater model like the 2016 model can be converted into superposition. So if you have exhibits that can explain that, and I'm sorry, Mr. Durbin, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but we have to try to make some progress here. And I thought maybe you were getting a little off track on the specifics here. So is that okay if we turn to Mr. Leffler?
Yeah, I think the first exhibit I'd like to look at is Exhibit 39, which should be Appendix E2 of the EIR, a report done by Hydrofocus.
Okay, we'll post Exhibit CalAm 39. And tell us what page you'd like us to turn to.
So just before we do that, I just want to point out that within a group of pages, I think you'll find, some information about the superposition model in this appendix, which starts with, I don't know the PDF numbers, but page number 24.
Okay, we can,
And
page
through-
24, the PDF numbers are written at the bottom right, so that's PDF page 38. Okay, tell us where we should scroll to on this page.
Is that? Oh, sorry. So I believe it's section 4 point, there's a section heading 4.2. Yeah, okay. So
Yeah, it's here.
yeah, so just from that point and then all the way through to PDF page 40, or no, sorry, document page 40, which is the end of section 5.4. All those pages talk in some way about the model, the superposition model, but I specifically want to go to page 33 of this document.
Okay, that's text page 33,
Yes.
which will be PDF page 47.
And then, yeah, so maybe scrolling down a little bit. Okay. And let me adjust some things on my end. Okay, so I'll just kind of read through it a little bit. Just so this first paragraph, or a short paragraph here, a superposition modeling approach solves for changes in water levels rather than their absolute values. Accordingly, we modified NMGWM 2016 to calculate the relative change in water levels due solely to slant well pumping. So the first thing I want to point out is that, from my understanding of what Hydrofocus did, they took the files for the 2015 model and they updated those with some modifications. There were some recommendations for improvement made during the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab review. And then, I think they may have done some of their own edits and updates to the model. And so they created, that transient version of the NMGWM 2016 model that, was sort of the more traditional model and was calibrated and so forth. And then they took that and they created the superposition model. So it's the same model, there's the transient model, and then that very same model with all its aquifer parameters was converted to a superposition model. And then in the next paragraph, it says that in modeling practice, superposition is implemented by setting all initial water levels equal within the model domain.
And that's not, you mean equal to each other or equal to what?
Well, so the initial water levels were specified with a value of 0.
Okay.
So that the simulated groundwater level changes correspond to drawdown. So in other words, if you're starting with 0, then if you get a value out of a superposition model of say -2, then that equates to the drawdown. Whereas in a transient model, you might have it gives you groundwater elevations, which say at a given point might be 5. And then you have, after you do a simulation, maybe you get a value of 3. So you have to subtract 5 minus 3 to get the value of 2 that you got directly from the superposition model. And then furthermore, it says constant or fixed water level boundaries are all specified equal to initial water levels, that the hydraulic gradient along the boundary is initially 0. And so essentially what you're doing is all the boundaries, the boundary conditions, the general head boundaries or whatever type of boundary they might be, the water level is set to 0. And the initial water levels within the model domain are set to 0. And so essentially what you have is a flat surface, a water level surface that's set at 0. And then it goes on to say that the modeled stresses represent the incremental change in relative relative to existing conditions, and therefore all background recharge and pumping is set equal to 0.
Okay.
So, that I think was, what I could find is one of the more succinct summaries of what they did, and how they created this superposition model. And so there's a couple of things you can do from that. And I think as Tim described, you can, insert a pumping well, and whatever those 0 elevations change to is the direct readout of the drawdown from that pumping well. And if you wanted to, you could sort of take that cone of depression, and if you had a water table map or a contour map of water levels, you could superimpose that on that map of what the actual groundwater elevations are and derive what the groundwater elevations would be with that pumping.
So instead of running 2 scenarios, it's sort of like you have existing conditions and then you have a model of the changes. So you just add that rather than running the 2 scenarios. I understand what you're saying. This really certainly heavily depends on it being a linear system. I can see that.
Mr. Lilly, this is Mr. Wilkins. I have a question. Mr. Durbin has went off screen and put his screen on mute. And I also noticed it appeared he was reading from something. And I'm just wondering, just in terms of the formalities of this panel, how we're handling that. And I don't have an objection. I just have some concerns seeing that this is over Zoom, how we're handling this.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. If you're all sitting in the hearing room up on the witness stand, you couldn't be conferring with your attorneys or anything like that. And I don't know if I said that before. I thought I had, but I'm counting on everyone being on the honors system. So I don't know, Mr. Durbin, you may be caught here. Were you conferring with attorneys or were you doing something else?
I was asking my wife how I did.
Oh, well, we won't ask what she said. But anyway, yeah, please don't.
If he's been reading
To
from
be
something,
clear, that is 100% not true. We have not communicated with any witness during exam. I resent that, but I will, as an officer of the court, tell you absolutely none of us have.
Well, yeah. Don't worry, Mr. Betts. Nobody has accused you of that yet. So
the only thing I was wondering is if he was reading from something initially, because he kept looking down at something, and it's possible he was, and I just wondered if you could ask him.
yeah, I don't know. Mr. Durbin, were you reading anything other than notes from your wife?
Yes, I created some notes and what I thought needed to be said.
Yeah, Mr. Wilkins, maybe that wouldn't be allowed in court, but for something that's this technical, frankly, I don't have a problem with witnesses writing things down that they want to say. I mean, that's what we as attorneys do all the time too. I really don't think this is the point where witnesses have to produce what they write down. So do you have any further comment on that, or are we willing to go forward with that understanding?
As I said, I just wanted to understand what the ground rules were for our witnesses and just want to make sure I know what they are. So no objection.
Okay, fair enough. So the ground rules are your witnesses can read stuff if they think so, if it doesn't interfere with their testimony, and they can write down notes themselves, but they should not be conferring with their attorneys or anybody else during the testimony process. Is that fairly clear to all the attorneys? And no problem clarifying that. And let's see about that. Let's make sure everybody follows those same rules. Thank you for that, Mr. Wilkins. Mr. Leffler, I have read this. I understand this. And I know enough about how models work. There's, as I say, if it really is linear, I can see where this is something that makes sense. But I think among other things, to give my technical staff some comfort in this, because they frankly were not familiar with the superposition approach, it would be good if you or Mr. Durbin or Dr. Ye could provide some kind of a technical write-up that explains superposition in general and why it's an accepted practice. I mean, I appreciate, Mr. Durbin, you were explaining to us how it's not sort of an, I'll say, an outgrowth of a comparison of two scenarios, and it's the way to run the model just once to do that. But I think it would be valuable for all of us to have some kind of a technical reference. There must be something out there that explains that, but I certainly didn't see anything in any of the Cal-Am exhibits. So can you, that's another, you're getting a lot of assignments, Mr. Leffler, but can you take the lead on that and get back to us?
Okay, but I will, yeah, we will work on that. I wanted to go to another document though.
Please, I interrupted you, so please go ahead.
Mr. Lilly, maybe just before we leave this one, because it's on the screen, maybe your staff has already seen this, but on attachment 1 referenced on the top of the screen is a illustration by Hydrofocus of how they would do a superposition model with an example.
Oh, okay. Well, that might be helpful. So attachment 1 in this file?
Yes, it starts on PDF page, pardon me, 113, I think.
Oh, okay.
It's an attachment. That may be the wrong page number.
No, that's right. It's PDF page 112. You're pretty close.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was going to mention that as well. There are 2 attachments to this document, and that attachment 1 provides a very helpful example.
okay, that I'll read it. I'm learning a lot. All right, and then I don't know. All right, so now we've totally interrupted you, although it was your own attorney who just did it. So where do you want to? And we will make a note, and we'll look at this. And if we have follow-up questions, we will. It's still might. I mean, these examples, the example and the simple expanded test model are probably useful, but it might be good if you or Mr. Durbin could provide us with some general published reference article about this, something that we can take official notice of and read. So why don't you see what you can find, work with your attorneys to have them transmit it to my office with, of course, CCs to everyone on the service list.
Right.
Is that a reasonable assignment?
Yes, that's a reasonable assignment. And actually, I think I can get towards that a little bit with the next exhibit.
Okay, now go ahead, please.
So I believe it's exhibit 105.
Okay, Cal-Am 105, we'll get up.
And well, first of all, I'd like to just kind of give you some page numbers, and then I'm going to focus in on a particular page. So just,
okay.
In terms of just some background materials on this topic and the model and so forth, I'd refer you to pages 29 to 30 as one more kind of background. And then
Okay, let me just scroll to page, or ask Ms. Mullen to scroll to page 29 just so we can see this. This is something new you uploaded, so I haven't had a chance to look at this before. I don't think. So this is an excerpt from the EIR, I take it?
So this is the in the section on draft EIR comments and responses in the final EIR.
Okay.
And I think this is under master responses. So just a couple pages of this is just background material on the groundwater model and kind of what happened during that time period. I think we've already described that. But I just kind of wanted to alert you to a couple pages here for just background on the modeling process during the EIR.
Okay, that is helpful. Thank you.
And then I'd like to mention that, pages 79 to 98, and again, pages, the page numbers in the document itself. I guess.
Oh, okay. So it looks like these do correspond. So text pages, what do you say, 79 to what, 80?
79 would be the first page.
Okay, Ms. Mullen, can you scroll to page 79? We're obviously we've all got some reading to do here. Okay.
Yeah, so these pages, you know, through 98 provide, you know, a lot of good information about the model and what they did for the EIR. And so that, you know, that would be, you know, an area to focus and read those pages. But I specifically wanted to go to page 93.
Okay. Oh, superposition. I can't believe I didn't find this, except I'm being sarcastic. You hadn't even filed this exhibit before. Go ahead.
Well, like I said, I know there's 4,000 pages in this document, so it's not necessarily easy to find things. So yeah, so this is a few pages of discussion specifically on superposition. So again, I mean, a good, you know, few pages to read. You were mentioning a reference, and I think actually Mr. Durbin mentioned this, but this Riley et al. 1987, I think is the reference that Tim may have been referring to. I believe it's a USGS document. And
is that cited on this page? I can't quite read this.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, towards the middle of the page where it says 1, 2, 3, right above that.
Oh, okay.
Riley et al. 1987. And actually those three, well, they're not bullets, but the numbers 1, 2, 3 summarizes some information from that document. And so basically what, you know, the sentence says, the principal advantages and constraints of using superposition are described by Riley et al. 1987 and summarized below. And then the three main points they bring up are the effects of a specified stress on the groundwater system can be evaluated even if other stresses in the basin are unknown, which I think, you know, one of the things maybe that Tim had mentioned. The effects of change in stress on the system can be evaluated even if the original conditions or subsequent period of equilibrium conditions are unknown. And then finally, the effect of one stress on a system can be isolated from the effects of all other stresses, which I think Mr. Durbin may have mentioned that. But, you know, so this is, you know, within here, you know, it gives a good reference starting point on the, you know, superposition modeling and a quick summary of some of the principal advantages of superposition modeling. So that, yeah, there's a good section in here embedded within the overall modeling discussion over like 21 pages. I think, I don't know, there might be 4 pages or so here on superposition.
Okay, so I'll ask you, and maybe that's the only reference we need, but can you track down Riley 1987 and send that to the AHO? We'll just mark it as another Cal-Am exhibit. I mean, if it's a USGS publication, I'm pretty sure we can take official notice of it.
Mr. Lilly, page
98
has the complete citation to Riley.
Okay. All right. So that's the homework assignment. Mr. Osias, make sure Mr. Leffler does this. I'm joking. He's reliable. But I think it just, since this is, I mean, I have some very qualified technical experts who spent a lot of time in groundwater modeling, and they were not familiar with this. So I want to make sure they have access to the technical background and can understand what's being done here. So that will be helpful.
Okay. And I think just the final point I wanted to make for now is that, you know, going back to the work that HydroFocus did, and I think I may have discussed this previously, but I just want to kind of reiterate it. And it's, you know, it's certainly in my testimony. But so HydroFocus created the superposition model that had a zero gradient to start with. And you can evaluate drawdown, you know, as we've discussed with that superposition model. So they did that as I think a separate activity. And then what they did is they looked at the field data that were available in terms of groundwater levels and looked at gradients that were measured in the field. And they determined a range of gradients that they thought were appropriate, inland gradients that they thought were representative of field conditions. And what they did then is, at least to my understanding, is they modified the boundary conditions, the water levels on the inland side of the model to create that gradient that was measured in the field. So for example, if they measured a 0.0007 gradient in the field, they modified the boundary conditions of the superposition model to create that same gradient in their superposition model. And then they subsequently, inserted the pumping of the slant wells, and then were able to determine the capture zone for a given gradient. And so the main point I wanted to make is that when you measure the gradients in the field and you look at the water levels in the field, that reflects all the recharge and discharge that's occurring. So all the rainfall percolation, whatever other sources of recharge, all the pumping of inland wells, that is represented by that gradient. That those stresses, those inflows and outflows created that gradient. So when you bring that gradient into a superposition model, you don't want to add more recharge to it because you've already accounted for that with your field data. And then if you do add more recharge, then you're going to alter those gradients that you said you were evaluating in the first place and make them shallower or possibly even reverse them. So I guess with that, that's, some thoughts on superposition and how HydroFocus implemented that.
Well, that's a lot. It's I'll say semi-intuitive, just from my point of view. And as I said before, you really have to have confidence these are linear systems for this to be able to work. And it's counterintuitive to have a superposition model that starts out with a flat gradient and then to essentially hardwire in a gradient by adding recharge on the inland side. But I understand what you have described, and that's what they have done. So that's helpful. We will certainly review all this. I'll just leave it at that. It wasn't clear to me or my staff from reading the materials we knew to read, but obviously there were a few things we didn't focus on. So do you have anything else, Mr. Leffler? Can I just go down my lines of questions now? Because I do have some.
Just one quick correction. I think what I heard is you said something about adding recharge on the inland side.
I'm sorry. If I said that, I should have said add inland boundary conditions. Excuse me. I'm not perfect here. I'm trying. Thank you for correcting that. Okay, so may I go ahead? Do you have anything else, or can I go ahead now? Because I do have a few questions, although frankly, I think a lot of them I now understand much better. So let's go to Exhibit CalAm 79 and go to PDF page 32. And go down to the last paragraph. Okay, maybe I better just get my notes here. Hang on. Okay, I think you now have the third line. The sentence begins, thus a superposition model that is based on representative / observed measured groundwater gradients, representative transmissivity values for the study area and representative pumping rates for which capture zones are being calculated are the only items that need to for the capture zone calculation. So I now understand what you said about groundwater gradients. So Tell me about representative transmissivity values, because I'm not understanding that, because I thought those would have been in the underlying model.
Right. So first of all, a transmissivity value is the hydraulic conductivity, which, yeah, we haven't talked about transmissivity yet. So transmissivity is the hydraulic conductivity value times the aquifer thickness. So it's, instead of units of feet per day, for example, you end up with units of feet squared per day. So it's essentially it's similar to a hydraulic conductivity value, but instead it's it's called a transmissivity value. But so the model has that information in it. So when you're setting up your model and putting in your layers and your hydraulic conductivity values, the model then that value of transmissivity is there in the model. So that's accounted for through a combination of the hydraulic conductivity and the thickness of a model layer.
Okay, so why is that singled out here? It seems like that's in the underlying model and doesn't need to be input into the superposition model.
It is in the underlying model. So in the hydrofocus example, they developed the transient model, they calibrated it, so it has those hydraulic conductivity and aquifer layer thicknesses in it. And so those same values are in the superposition version of the model. I think here I guess I was just trying to speak to each of the variables that's in the formula up above.
Oh, okay.
I think that's all I was trying to do there.
Okay. This looks good. Okay, so let's go. This is probably going to go pretty fast now. If we can go to Exhibit Callium 104 and slide 11. You can just make it one notch bigger. Yeah, there you go, full screen mode. There. Okay, so this was one of the slides you discussed on Wednesday, I believe, Mr. Leffler. So what are the different rows? There are no labels for the rows here. So what are the different rows in this slide correspond to?
Okay. Yeah, so well, let's start with the first column as well, and then we'll go through each row here. So these are the different gradients that were evaluated in the Weiss study. So, a zero gradient or a flat gradient. A negative sign means inland. So an inland gradient of 0.0004 and an inland gradient of 0.0007 and 0011. So each row represents what was stated by Weiss to be the gradient that they were evaluating.
Okay.
And so, yeah, that's basically what each row represents. It's essentially a different stated gradient that was evaluated.
And that's what they did, Weiss did by inputting the inland modifying the inland boundary conditions as necessary to get each gradient.
Right. I think, they may have gotten I think they got the hydrofocus superposition model, which already had that information, at least for the, well, actually it would have had the information, I guess, for all these gradients, starting with the original, superposition model with the zero gradient. These are the same gradients that hydrofocus evaluated for capture zones. So they started with that. And then all I was trying to show here, I think, is that, so if you don't add any additional recharge, which, in the context of what we're doing here is what you should be doing, then you would have the same gradients that hydrofocus evaluated and that Weiss started with.
So that second column says actual 180-foot gradient. Is that what it means, or is that modeled gradient?
Well, that's the modeled gradient, but Hydro Focus developed these based on field data.
Okay, so how did they get 4 different values? Is this for different places in the study area?
Well, so the gradient varies over time and maybe from one place to another a little bit. So I think, at least my understanding is that Hydro Focus looked at the field information and they determined a range of gradients. So just to be clear, backing up is like with a transient model, the gradient's always fluctuating a little bit based on seasonal and year-to-year climate conditions. So I think it's intended to encompass a range of that.
Okay, so I guess basically the first column and the second column are pretty much the same thing then, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and the other columns, I get, you don't need to explain those. That's what you're saying is the incorrect addition of recharge on top of the superposition model.
Right. And I guess I just want to point out one thing real quick is that I don't remember what table it is, but I believe a table in the Weiss report towards the end of the document where they're talking about where they're saying they simulated a flat gradient. They noted that by adding recharge, they actually created a seaward gradient. But that information doesn't really come out in most of the Weiss report. There's like a footnote on a table that speaks to that.
Okay, so in your view, did Weiss use the superposition model approach correctly?
Well, my recollection is they did do simulations without recharge, but most of the simulations and most of the entries in their table included recharge.
Okay, and you're saying that's just not correct?
Right.
Okay.
I mean, it's changing the gradient that they're actually evaluating.
Well, you mean they're evaluating changes in the gradient due to additional recharge?
Right.
But you're saying you should never add recharge to a superposition model?
Well, specific to this purpose of evaluating capture zone boundaries.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you have described how Weiss, I guess in your view, correctly modified the inland boundary conditions to create these gradients. And you have described how the well pumping was inserted into the model so you could determine the capture zones. Are there any other parameters that you believe ever should be modified when you're using the superposition modeling approach?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that the way that Hydro Focus originally did it, was the correct approach. And again, Weiss, did do those simulations without recharge for, just to reconfirm that. You can do, and Weiss did do some sensitivity studies on things like aquifer parameters. So if one wants to do, sensitivity with a superposition model on, aquifer parameters, they did a lot of those types of analyses, which, I think is fine. But the problem is that, that they also include the recharge. So, you could just do sensitivity to say, well, this is the calibrated value, but what if it's a little different, and what result do we get? And so I think that's a little bit of what they were trying to do there, but it's influenced by adding recharge.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to Dr. Ye now. If we can put up Exhibit CalAm 45 and go to PDF page 8. And these, now that I understand superposition modeling, this should go a little faster. So if you can, the second paragraph. Okay, so Dr. Ye, the second paragraph, the second sentence states, the EIR consultant converted NMGWM 2016 to a superposition model to conduct the analyses presented in the EIR. And just remind me, who was the EIR consultant?
ESA,
And who was their sub-consultant for that work?
hydrofocus.
And that was Hydrofocus, okay. And is it your understanding, well, I'll just ask you, and if you have to repeat what Mr. Durbin and Mr. Leffler said, that's fine. What is your understanding of what Hydrofocus did to convert NMGWM 2016 to a superposition model?
Yeah, I think first of all, they assigned the initial water level to be 0. So it's a flat hydraulic gradient. Then for the boundary, they also assigned that as 0. So the hydraulic gradient will not change due to the boundary conditions. Then when they run the predicted model run, they don't have any recharge and discharge terms, except they add a little bit stream bed percolation. That is differences, additional recharge of a stream bed percolation due to the project pumping. So in addition to that, the only other flux term is the project pumping. So they ran that model and quantify the drawdown under project condition, then plot that contours.
Well, did they have to input an inland boundary condition to get a gradient before they did their analysis?
No, when they quantify the water level change due to the project condition, they use a 0 boundary condition.
Okay, so that means 0 gradient as well.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's the for the change in water levels. Then
Go ahead.
Then they did the capture zone, just like Mr. Leffler mentioned. They look at the observed hydraulic gradients. Then they adjust the boundary condition to create that hydraulic gradient. Then again, run the model, then delineate that capture zone or mixing zone.
Okay, so they did adjust the boundary conditions to get the gradient.
Right, but that's for different purpose, yeah.
Okay, as far as you know, that's all they did for that?
They also
The superposition?
They also did several sensitivities on the vertical hydraulic conductivity, and the horizontal hydraulic conductivity. The sensitivity for the changing water levels.
Okay. Okay, so let's go forward to the next page of this same exhibit, which is text page 2. And this is table 1 of the Weiss, which is just your description of the Weiss's proposed scope of work and the HWG independent analysis. And if you can scroll down a little, Ms. Mullen, I was going to ask you about task 4, which says if the configuration of the capture model has a recharge component, vary it to simulate the historical range of rainfall conditions and calculate OWPs using mass balance. And the column to the right says not applicable for a superposition model. Is the reason that's not applicable for a superposition model the reasons that Mr. Durbin and Mr. Leffler have described?
Right.
Okay, so we can move on. And then if we can just go to the next page and go down to task 9. And this says on the left, modify the southern boundary conditions in layer 2 to constant, but more realistic values for the entire model run. If this modification creates perch conditions that crash the model, the FOSGA will be thickened to get the bottom of it below the water levels in the 180-foot aquifer. And you wrote not applicable for superposition model. Can you explain why that task would not be applicable to the superposition model?
Yeah, so we did this for the transient 2022 model. We add that additional model layer in order to create that perched condition above FOSVA.
But why did you write here not applicable for superposition model?
Because the hydrofocus superposition model cannot to simulate these conditions.
Oh, I see, because it doesn't have that extra layer.
Right.
Okay. Okay, I think, let me keep going here. I think I can jump over a couple of my questions here, so just bear with me a moment.
Can I just interject, and I don't know, Tim or Johnson, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but on this task 9 not being applicable. So again, we're talking about a boundary condition which are set to 0 in superposition models. And, you know, from a standpoint of calculating drawdown, you know, that would have no effect on the result.
Okay. All right, so let's go forward to 2 more pages. Okay, right there, stop. Whoops. Yeah, if you can scroll up just a little bit, Ms. Mullen, thank you. Okay, this paragraph, this second paragraph here on this page states HWG obtained the original ModFlow model input files and used them to rerun and verify NMGWM 2016. Once the correct model input files were confirmed, HWG developed and ran iterative sensitivity model runs for different scenarios as an independent analysis to Weiss's proposed SOW using ModFlow and ModPath. Okay, I guess actually I don't have questions about that. I want to get to what you did in 2022, but I think that's on from here. Okay, well, let me just ask you this. This technical memo here for 2016 that you prepared for describing the 2016 modeling work, in parts 3 and 4, you talk about sensitivity model scenarios in part 3, and then in part 4, you talk about sensitivity model scenario results. Were those runs made using the superposition model from the 2016 North Marina groundwater model?
Correct. 2016, developed by HydroFocus.
But with the superposition
Right.
model included?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so let's go on to CalAm 88. And go to page 2. And paragraph 5. So here it is. As it reads, as stated in my direct testimony at the request of the HWG, I currently am updating a transient groundwater model that models potential effects of the MPWSP in the North Marina area. And then you put North Marina groundwater model or NMGWM 2022. This model was recently completed, calibrated, and scenario results are presented in your technical memorandum. So, Dr. Ye, did you first have to update NMGWM 2016 to make NMGWM 2022?
That earlier TM, we started that in 2020. It's really to conduct independent analysis on the WISE proposed model scenarios.
Okay, so that's why you had to update, or that's why you decided to update it.
Right.
Okay, so now let's move on. We're getting close here to CalAm 8, exhibit CalAm 89, and go to PDF page 12. So in the first paragraph, I'm going to start reading here. On about line 6, the 6th line down, it says the NMGWM 2016 was then used to calculate water level changes. Oh, wait a second. I thought we were getting to the superposition approach. I guess my question is, and maybe, I guess my question is, you first updated the 2016 model to make the 2022 model, and then did you also prepare a superposition model then based on your 2022 model?
We prepared 2 TN in 2022. The first one is June 2022. That one, we use a HydroFocus superposition model, then ran some scenarios and summarize that results in the June 2022 TM.
Okay, so Ms. Mullen, scroll down a couple of paragraphs. And I think the paragraph here at the bottom of the page says the results of this investigation are summarized in a technical memorandum entitled HWG Independent Analysis to WISE Proposed Scope of Work to Address Area Aquifer Impacts Related to California American Water's Proposed Monterey Peninsula Water Supply Project, dated June 22nd, 2022. That's the June TM you're talking about?
Correct.
And is that TM a CalAm exhibit? Because I don't think I've found it.
I believe, this is David Osias. Sorry, Mr. Lilly.
Go ahead, Mr. Osias. If you can help me, I would appreciate it.
I believe it's CalAm 45, but I'd like the witness to confirm my
I'm
comprehension.
pretty sure that's, let's see here. Okay, let's check.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, got it. So then the next question is, well, that's good. So then did you do, it seems like the way superposition works, though, you would have to then take your updated model and prepare a new superposition model or a new superposition model. Have you done that?
No. Once we update the model, we did 6 model scenarios, transient model scenarios.
Oh, okay. So why did you not use the superposition modeling approach after everyone else had used it?
Yeah, I think one of the issue for superposition model is like when you calculate that ocean water percentage, you have to assume hydraulic gradient, and like all these model run, people assume that constant hydraulic gradient for 63 years. So we know in reality that is not going to happen. So when we run the transient model, we can vary the recharge and the groundwater pumping on the monthly basis. That will reflect more reality of the hydraulic gradients.
So how do you know what to input into the variations in recharge and pumping on a monthly basis?
So that will based on some assumptions. So first of all, we have to pick hydrology. So for this predicted model run, we use the historical hydrology from 1970 to 2019, 50 years, then repeat twice. Use that for the 100 years predicted into the future. Then for the groundwater pumping, we made some assumptions like use current groundwater pumping or a reduction of 50% of the pumping or reduction of 30% of the pumping.
Okay, I see that gets me 3 scenarios. How did you get to 6 scenarios?
So each of that assumption, we ran no project, then with the project pumping.
Okay, got it. So 2 times 3 equals 6.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I would just add that, you know, we've used multiple tools. So, you know, a superposition model is one type of tool. We believe it has, you know, some good applications. A transient model is another kind of tool. You know, it has some, you know, good applications. So I think, you know, we're trying to look at using multiple tools and multiple ways of looking at this. You know, there's there's been some criticisms that, you know, you should use, you know, about superposition and preference for transient models. So, I mean, again, I think although, you know, there's been historical transient models that we've used, but I think, you know, we're just, you know, trying to analyze this, you know, problem and situation in the best way we can, using multiple tools, field data, analytical approaches, superposition modeling, numerical modeling. So I think, it's just, I think it's good to look at it with multiple tools.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. So let's go forward to PDF page 19, which is text page 10, I believe. If you can just scroll down, that's good. In section 2.5.1.1, the last sentence says the results of the long-term TSW pump tests are presented, and then there's another TM referenced here, TM4. I'll ask you, Dr. Ye, or the attorneys, is this TM a CalAm exhibit? Does anybody know? I couldn't find it.
I'm looking.
Okay, thank you.
Is it possible? Let's see. I guess I'd want the witness to confirm it's not included within 89.
Oh,
If that's okay for me to ask that question.
sure, go ahead. We're getting informal on a Friday afternoon. I don't see it here. Okay, well, we don't need to spend more time on this. Mr. Osias, your homework assignment is to either shoot us an email, of course, with copies to everyone on the service list, telling us what exhibit it is, or to send us the TM so we can add it as an exhibit.
Yes, sir.
That will be fairly straightforward. Okay, bear with, I know it's getting late. I appreciate all your patience. If we can go to CalAm Exhibit 79, I have one last set of questions for Mr. Loeffler. Whoops, I must have gotten the wrong number. I want text page 19, so I think it might be. Can you just scroll up? I got something wrong here. It's just scroll up 5 pages if you can. We should never allow 2 different page numbering systems, but we do. Okay, one more page up. Right there, stop. Okay, so this is you, Mr. Loeffler. This is your rebuttal testimony appendix. And the sentence here says, the model results being presented by MCWD Marina consultants include adding more recharge on top of measured or assumed gradients in the 180-foot aquifer that already include all sources of recharge or discharge in the aquifer system. Now I have to think about what modeling work you're talking about here. So if you can tell me, because I don't know whether this is you're talking about a superposition model or the 2022 modeling work. So please tell me what you're talking about here.
So the modeling results presented by MCWD Marina consultants, I think I was referring to their direct testimony and some of the maps that they provided of capture zones. And I believe I superimposed them on some of my figures But, I think, for example, they presented a capture zone that was stated to be for a 0.0004 gradient, which is one of the gradients that Hydro Focus originally developed. And so that's what I'm referring to is, and they may have derived that from Weiss's work. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I think what I was referring to here was those type of results that were presented in their direct testimony.
Okay, so basically, I'll say this and tell me if I've got it right or wrong. If they are discussing results that are based on a superposition modeling approach from Weiss, then they should not also add recharge on top of that. Is that what your point is here?
Well, they may have well, correct, but I think they might have just taken the Weiss results and that's what they presented as their modeling results.
I see.
Yeah, I don't know if it's their modeling results. I think they did some additional modeling, but I don't recall right now. But
okay, that's fine. So it may be that Weiss, in your view, incorrectly added recharge.
Right.
Somebody incorrectly added recharge to the superposition is what you're saying here.
Well, I think they did do some supplemental modeling themselves, I think using the superposition model, and they also added recharge. So I think there's some of that too. So it's a combination of some Weiss results and some of their additional own modeling, but using the existing superposition model and adding recharge.
Okay. Well, thank you for that clarification. So, Ms. Mullen, you may go ahead and take down that exhibit. So we're to the point of a break. I think I'm done. I will check with my staff during the break to see whether my questions have raised any other questions, but if they haven't, I'm done. So based on that, for Mr. Moore or Mr. Osias or Mr. Betts, is one of you planning on asking any redirect questions? And if it's you, Mr. Moore, you're trying to talk, but you're on mute, so we can't hear you.
What I was
There you
saying was I'm sure we're going to disappoint a lot of people right now, but we're not going to do redirect right now, Mr. Leffler.
Okay, what about Dr. Ye or Mr. Durbin? Any redirect for any of them?
I don't believe, but I'll let Michael answer that question.
Mr. Betts?
No.
Okay, well, that'll take care of that.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's just take a break, and our assignments during the break are for me to meet with my staff to ask them whether my brutal questioning, brutal in terms of lack of understanding, has raised any more questions for them. And if not, we'll be done. If so, it will be just a few. And then I do want to handle this afternoon offers of exhibits. And I did receive one email from Callahan's attorneys and one joint email from City of Marina and Marina Coast on offers of exhibits. So we'll do those. I'll ask for the parties to offer the exhibits they want to. And then for the other party, I'll ask if the other parties have any objections. And with that, we should be done for the afternoon. Then we can all take a break and be ready to start Monday morning. So it's 3:37. Let's go ahead. Since we don't have a lot to do and it may take a little time for me to go through this. Let's say 3:50, no, that's too soon. 3:55. We'll reconvene at 3:55. As a reminder, just turn off your video and a microphone. And just so you know, I don't know if there were some nice chats going on during the break, which I'm happy to hear, but I don't know if those of you who are doing the chats realize it, but everyone else can hear you chatting. I think everyone was pretty circumspect with what they were chatting about, but you might want to be careful about that. Just because you can't see us doesn't mean we can't hear you. So we're going to come back at 3:55 and we'll see where we are then. Thank you.
you come here. Tell me. I know where it is.
Mr. Moore, you're not on mute yet.
I'm trying to solve that problem, David.
That's good.
Just do it again.
You just clicked it there.
Okay, we're back. We're just waiting for Mr. Moore. There's Mr. Moore. Okay. So thank you all for coming back. I have just one follow-up question for Mr. Durbin. And I bear with us. I know it's late in Great Britain. I'm wondering, Mr. Durbin, you obviously have more experience in Salinas Valley groundwater modeling than all the rest of us. Has there ever been any attempt to do a model that included salinity as a modeled parameter?
I think that Dr. Ye had a model that looked at salinity. Other than that, I think there's ongoing work to develop such a model.
Okay. Also, I'll ask you, Dr. Ye, what is the I mean, I know it must be an incredibly daunting technical task, but are you aware of any attempts to include salinity as a modeled parameter in Salinas Valley groundwater modeling?
Yes, the 2015 3 models we talk about, the CMIX model, it's a variable density model.
Oh, okay. It has salinity as a variable?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the only one of the models we've talked about here?
Yes.
Okay. And I take it none of your testimony discusses that salinity modeling work, does it?
No.
Does any of your testimony discuss that 2015 salinity modeling work?
No.
Okay. Okay. So my staff doesn't have any other questions. CalAm doesn't have any redirect. I'm going to summarize the assignments I have noted, and we will send a follow-up memo, email or memo on this. I don't have a lot, but CalAm is going to produce the Riley 1987 report that was cited on page 98 of Exhibit CalAm 105, if my notes are right. And also, CalAm is going to find out if the TM4 that Dr. Ye discussed is a CalAm exhibit and either send us an email identifying what exhibit that is, or send the TM, a copy of the TM as an exhibit. And then Mr. Donald is going to work with Mr. Durbin and Dr. Ye to assemble the model files. If they've already been produced to City of Marina and Marina Coast attorneys, hopefully it's not that hard to make an additional copy or copies, and we will make arrangements to pick those up so we can see what we can do, what my technical people can do looking at the model. And of course, they may have some follow-up questions. So those are the only pending assignments I have. I received an email this morning from CalAm's attorney saying that CalAm intended to offer all of CalAm exhibits 1 through 105, except for 4 and 103, which were prior versions of Mr. Leffler's summary slides, but to offer all of the other CalAm exhibits into evidence. So either Mr. Osias or Mr. Moore or Mr. Betts, does CalAm in fact want to offer those exhibits into evidence?
We do.
Okay. Are there any objections to the offer of any of those exhibits into evidence?
I'm happy to speak on behalf of the City of Marina.
Go ahead.
First, one clarification. I don't think it was all of CalAm's exhibits. I think 63, 64, and 65 were the Owens exhibits, which were not admitted.
Yes, thank you. 60, I missed that. So 64 through 66 are omitted. I don't know why I missed that this morning. I must have been sleepy. But thank you for that clarification. So I think it's 1 through 105, except not 3, 64 to 66, or 103. Do I have that now right, Ms. Meisenhower?
Yeah,
Almost. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
You
What
you
else?
said not 3. We do include 3, perhaps, that's Mr. Leffler's direct testimony. It's number 4.
Oh, man. Let me try again. Not all of, I want to try to get this on the record clear.
We want 4.
Cal-Am 1 through 105, except not Cal-Am 4, Cal-Am 66, 64 through 66, or Cal-Am 103, but offer all the others. Do I now have the offer correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Betts. And sorry, it's getting late on a Friday afternoon. So for Ms. Meisenheimer, do you want to state objections to some of those exhibits?
yes, thank you. Exhibits 90 through 102. Those are the exhibits that were uploaded the day before trial without explanation. I don't believe they've been used with any witnesses. And so I don't think it would be appropriate to admit them at this point. We can revisit that, of course, if they're used next week.
So,
All right, Mr. Betts, do you have a response?
Mr. Osias, well, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Osias.
So these are offered for impeachment, which will happen next week. And they're all either government documents. Actually, they're all government documents, especially if you consider MCWD a government, which it is, a public agency. So they're admissible regardless of being impeachment. But that's what their purpose is, which is why they weren't used with our witnesses today. And rather than surprise anyone, we posted them early.
Okay, well, and it does help for our, you may see now, you have seen now how we upload and screen share things. So, okay, so I will defer ruling on those. I sort of picked up from Ms. Meisenheimer that she may not object in the long run, but she wants to wait and see how they're used next week. But I tend to agree with Mr. Osias. It looks like they're documents of which we can take official notice. I mean, in theory, somebody has to authenticate them, but I don't think there's going to be any question that they're authentic. I don't think anybody's disputing that. So let's defer ruling on that. So Ms. Meisenheimer, any other objections to Cal-Am's exhibits?
None from the city, thank you.
All right, and does Marina Coast have any objections to any of these Cal-Am exhibits?
We don't have any objections per se, but we would like to reserve our potential objections that they would be admissible for the trial in this matter. There's a large number of exhibits that there's no testimony as to, so we're not waiving any objections should they be attempt to be admitted as evidence in the trial in this matter if we go back. But for your consideration for this proceeding investigation, we have no objections.
Okay, well, and certainly that's something for the court to rule on, not for me to rule on. So you've noted your, whatever you call it, reservation. So that's fine for the record. Okay, so for my hearing, I will admit the exhibits. I'm not going to try to, well, I better say them one more time so I get it right. We're admitting Cal-Am 1 through 89, except not Cal-Am 4 or Cal-Am 64, 65, or 66. And we are admitting Cal-Am 104 and 105. Did I get that right? I think.
And not denying the remainder, just reserving.
Don't worry, Mr. Osias. That's clear on the record. The rest, 90 through 102, subject to further ruling.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, from City of Marina and Marina Coast, there was a list. The list includes several Cal-Am exhibits. They've already been admitted, so obviously we don't need to discuss those. But it looks like I'm going to just go with Marina Coast first. We have
Mr. Lilly, I hate to interrupt. Could we let Mr. Durbin go?
Oh, I'm sorry. Where is he?
I just saw that he turned his camera off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Durbin, thank you very much for your testimony and for sticking with us until I won't even ask what hour it is now there. But thank you very much for your patience and testimony. You are dismissed, and I hope you have a good weekend. So thank you, Mr. Osiris. I should have thought of that.
I'm sorry.
No problem. Okay, so let's go forward with Marina Coast is now offering, as I see it, 103, 104, and 105. And we'll get to the deposition transcript excerpts in a minute. But are those, for somebody from Marina Coast, please speak. Are those the three Marina Coast exhibits that are being offered into evidence today?
Yes, Mr. Lilly.
Okay. Are there any objections to those three exhibits coming into evidence or being admitted
Yes.
into evidence?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Betts.
I'll start with 103. This was the Mr. Crook's written testimony from a different proceeding. And my objection is it's irrelevant. It dealt with some supply and demand issue. And if you'll recall, I think Ms. Muzine asked a question about whether he recalled a certain supply and demand issue, which has nothing to do with this case. And there was only one portion that she referred him to, and I think it was just to refresh his memory, which is the reason I believe who allowed him even to show it. But refreshing someone's memory with the document doesn't make it admissible. So it's irrelevant, hearsay, and has nothing to do with this case. And to the extent it was, there was only one small page versus a multi-page document with attachments.
Okay, is there any response? I guess, Ms. Muzine, if you're still here,
Ms. Muzine is not available today, but I can respond.
go ahead, Mr. Brochure.
As
Oh,
Mr.
sorry.
Betts just said, it's supplemental testimony from Mr. Crooks, who's a party opponent. So he's the hearsay exception. It's also a document that you can take official notice of.
Okay, it certainly comes in under the admissions exception to the hearsay rule. There's no question about that. Mr. Betts, we're pretty loose on, I've been pretty loose on letting background documents into evidence. So as far as the relevance objection goes, I'm going to overrule that. And it was, Mr. Crooks did authenticate it. So I think it's at least marginally relevant. It's authenticated and it's subject to the admissions exception to the hearsay rule. So I'm going to admit to MCWD 103. Mr. Betts, do you have any objections to MCWD 104 or 105?
I do on 104. That again dealt with a one paragraph about a supposed conflict. And again, we think that's irrelevant. A conflict about a patent has nothing to do with this case. To the extent we brought up conflict, it was the issue of Marina Coast Water District's crime with Mr. Collins. And our argument there is that goes to the whole motive of their opposition and their objection to our case. Whereas a one-liner about a potential patent conflict has nothing to do with the issues in this case. So the objection is irrelevant.
Okay, and that objection is overruled. Again, I think it can come in as background information. Frankly, I think there is at least some relevance to the issue of why there was a change in consultants between 2015 and 2016. Again, I don't know that this is going to have a huge bearing on any of the issues that the court has referred to us, but I'm going to let it into evidence for that purpose. And 105, do you have any objection to 105?
No.
Okay, so exhibits MCWD 103, 104, and 105 are admitted. So we'll turn to City of Marina. And for City of Marina, we have 34, 35, and 36. I assume Ms. Meisenheimer or Mr. Spalding, you want to offer those into evidence?
Yes, thank you.
Are there any objections to those three exhibits?
No.
Okay, those three exhibits are admitted into evidence. Okay, that brings us to the deposition transcript excerpts. And there are four listed here, and I need a little help. I hope one of you can help me. Let's go through them. The first one is Mr. Dr. Oh, and incidentally, I don't know if they're still here, but Mr. Leffler and Dr. Ye, you don't need to listen to all this attorney stuff. You're off the hook. It's late Friday afternoon. Thank you both very much for your patience and understanding and going through this whole process, particularly with all my somewhat inartful questions today. But you can listen if you want, but if you want to go home and start your weekend, you're both dismissed. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Woodland.
Okay, regarding the deposition transcript excerpts, I just need a little help on which party offered those. So let's start with Dr. Ye's transcript. The first entry in this table is his volume 1, pages 155 to 156. Who offered that as an exhibit?
Marina Coast.
For impeachment, that was Marina Coast. So Mr. Brochard, I'm going to go ahead and identify that. Where are we? I think we're to 106 as far as MCWD exhibits. Is that correct?
I believe so.
I'll just, it's important to get these things right. I'm going to just double check here. I'm pretty sure that's where we are. Bear with me, it just takes a couple of clicks. Marina Coast. Yeah, we're down to 105. So we'll identify that as 106. I think what we said before was we don't want to admit the whole transcripts of these depositions. There's a lot of material. There were certainly objections, I'm sure, to some and so forth. But what I propose is that I would ask Mr. Brochard and company to make an exhibit labeled MCWD 106, which would have the cover page so we know what this came from. And then these pages and lines from this deposition. And then that would be admitted as an exhibit. And I think it is important to have in the record because it was used for impeachment. So does Cal-Am have any objection to that excerpt from that deposition transcript being admitted for that purpose?
106, no.
Okay, so that's MCD to 106. And while we're on you, Mr. Brochard, are any of these other deposition transcript excerpts from MCWD?
Yes, the next one is also.
Okay, so this is from volume 2 of Dr. Ye's deposition, pages 225 through 226. So we'll mark that as MCWD 107. Is there, and same process, of course, and please include the cover page and the pages, and you can block out the lines that aren't included and label it as an exhibit number. So is there any objection from Cal-Am to that one coming into evidence?
No.
Okay, so that's admitted as well. Any of the others yours, Mr. Brochard, or the others City of Marina?
The others are the city.
Okay, so for City of Marina, first of all, let me get my numbering system. I think we're through. Let me just double check. I think we're through Marina 106.
Should we be at
36?
I think we should be at 37.
Yes, thank you. So the Durban transcript of the Durban Depot Volume 1, we have pages listed here, and we would mark that as City of Marina. To give you an idea, 37. Okay, so we'll mark that as that, and I assume you want to offer that, Ms. Meisenhower?
I do, thank you.
All right, so does Cal-Am have any objection to that coming into evidence?
No.
All right, so that one's admitted. And then the Loeffler deposition transcript, volume 1, pages 58 and 76 through 77, will mark as City of Marina 38. Ms. Meisenheimer, so you want to offer that?
I do. And also before we wrap up, I do want to note that we have the same reservation of rights that MCWD stated, that of course we reserve the right to object to admissibility in the main proceeding.
Okay, and I'll repeat what I said. The judge can figure that one out. I've got enough work to do here without worrying about his proceeding. But that's fine to state that objection for the record. So, Mr. Betts, any objection to City of Marina 38 coming in?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead. Please state your objection.
Sure. As a backdrop, the way that a lot of the examination was done, whether it be a document or a deposition, and we really have a problem with this, is taking a sentence out of a document or a sentence out of a deposition when there was more to it. And what really became problematic, and my objection is it's very misleading, was on page 58 of Mr. Loeffler's deposition, and Mr. Spalding tried to use it to support a comment about a seaward gradient. And he knows, he was at the deposition. If you look at the full part of the testimony, pages 55 through 58, it shows that there's either a typo or is taken out of context. So it's exactly the gotcha that I think you identified early on in these proceedings we shouldn't be doing. The legal objection is it's misleading. And if so, it should not come in. And if it does, for the rule of completeness, the entirety of pages 55 through 58 should come in.
Okay. And I'll just say, Mr. Betts, you could have covered this on redirect, but I'm glad you didn't because it was going to be Friday afternoon. I think we can probably address this by just letting those pages in. Ms. Meisenheimer, please. I interrupted you. Go ahead. You started to speak.
Sure, we're just taking a quick look at those pages. I don't anticipate it's an issue.
I think we can probably solve this. I mean, I think Mr. Betts states something that certainly concerns me. So if we can solve that issue by adding pages 55 through 57 to the exhibit, it sounds like would that address your concern, Mr. Betts?
It would. In fact, I would encourage you to read it all and look at the question that was asked by Mr. Spalding, just for the overall purpose, so you can see what was happening. So yes.
Yeah, and obviously, if I miss something, you can address that in your briefing at the appropriate time. So,
Mr. Lilly, we have no objection to 55 through 58 coming in.
Okay, so that will be exhibit Marina 38, will be pages 55 through 58 and 76 through 77. And with that, does Callahan have any objection to that exhibit coming into evidence?
No.
Okay, and thank you. I just want to compliment you both. That was an efficient way to deal with an issue that otherwise could have taken a long time. So thank you both very much for that. Okay, I don't have anything else for this afternoon. I'm sure nobody's going to complain if we stop a little bit early. The plan for Monday morning is to have an attorney opening statement from one of the Marina Coast attorneys, followed by the two summaries of testimony from two of Marina Coast's witnesses, that being Mr. Schertzinger and Mr. Ash. And if it's Dr. Ash, I apologize. And then cross-examination. I'm not sure how it goes. I have a feeling it'll be better to do cross-examination of each witness separately because they cover totally different things. But we'll see. And we'll see about time limits. The one thing I wanted to say to alert Marina Coast to this, Mr. Ash had, by the way, is it Dr. Ash or Mr. Ash?
It's Dr. Ash.
Okay. Even though I don't have one, I know how hard it is to get a PhD. So I have a great amount of respect for people who've gone through that work. So I will call him Dr. Ash. So Dr. Ash, he has about twice as many slides as anyone else. I think there was somewhere between 45 and 50. And that's okay, but I didn't just proportionally increase the amount of time for him to summarize his direct testimony because he had a lot of slides. I don't think that really would have been fair to the other witnesses. So I put down a 45-minute summary limit for him. Go ahead, Mr. Wilkins.
So, and we were discussing that with him because back when we put these slides together, we weren't sure what his direct would be or his rebuttal. So we put together the slides, and I did talk to him about this. And it may be difficult for your office to go between the slides because, again, we didn't know how it was going to go at this point in time. So we put in all the slides we thought he might want. And he's prepared or he told me he's prepared. We were supposed to meet this afternoon, but that obviously didn't happen.
Sorry.
A curtailed PowerPoint presentation that includes the same slides that were in his testimony, but has eliminated a large number of them because there's no way we're going to get through all of them that would potentially allow you to just go next slide, next slide, next slide. I haven't had a chance to look at it with him, but that we were potentially going to submit that as revised slides. It would not be any surprise. They're all graphics that have been in his testimony.
So as I understand it, would you have a new exhibit number, which would be a subset of the slides you previously submitted?
That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. Well, it certainly would be. I mean, that and Mr. Leffler submitted revised slides. He didn't delete any, but he did that, and that's fine. That was fine. So the easiest way to do that, Mr. Wilkins, would be for you to work with Dr. Ash and prepare a new file that has just the slides he wants to talk about, and we'll give it a new exhibit number. And then just the way we did with Mr. Leffler's slides, we'll admit that, assuming there are no other objections, we'll admit the new file and not the old file. That's going to be a lot easier than next slide, next slide, next slide. So can you do that and try to upload it? And if you represent to all of us that the new file does not contain any new slides, but just is a subset of the old file, I don't think anybody's going to have any reason to object to that. And just upload it sometime before 9 a.m. tomorrow morning or Monday morning, preferably like 8 a.m. if you can, so we have time to get it ready, and we'll go that way. Does that work for you?
I'll see if I can get it done over the weekend, yes.
Sorry to give you a weekend assignment, but I suspect it's not the first time you've worked over a weekend in this case.
Mr. Lilly.
Go ahead.
So our comment now is until we see them, we'd like to reserve the right to object. I'm not saying we will, but until we see them, because we're preparing Cross, as you can imagine, and
Yes.
not yet knowing what his summary slides say now. So let us at least have a chance to look at it.
Just so we're clear, you have
We have the
all
long
the-
set.
you
Yes.
have the whole set, so you have everything. I understand it may not be efficient because you make prepare cross-X on slides he ends up not using, but you have all the slides he's going to present on Monday.
I'm not saying we don't. I'm saying if
Right.
we wanted to ask a question about one of those he deletes, we might care. I'm not saying we will, but I just want to have a right to see it.
Just to be
Okay.
clear,
What's
all
locked
the
in?
slides he has are from his direct testimony, and we are not in any way going to try and withdraw them. This isn't about withdrawing slides, it's just he won't have time to cover them all, and we didn't know which ones he would want to
Yeah,
cover.
so Mr. Osias, if you want to cross-X about a slide he's deleted, you can either refer to the old file of all his slides or to the parts of his testimony that have those slides. So I think you'll be able to cross-examine in the, I think, relatively unlikely event he
Right.
will delete some slides that you want to cross-X about. I mean, I understand you're going to have to be a little nimble here. And frankly, the easiest way to deal with that probably is to prepare your cross-X of his testimony file rather than his slides. But I think you can do that fairly readily here.
I'm not
Yeah.
arguing. I was just mentioning we haven't seen them yet.
No, that's fine. We're all doing well. I'd say it's been a long week, but we only started on Wednesday, so maybe I
It
can't.
only feels like a week.
It feels like a week. It does.
Sounds
All
like
right.
a 10 o'clock start time Monday might help that.
That is a good point, Mr. Betts.
Uh,
Go ahead, Ms. Meisenheimer. Oh boy, we're getting into some controversy,
Oh,
but
man.
go ahead.
No, and Monday, it is Halloween, and for those of us with kids starting later and going later might not be the most ideal circumstance.
Okay, I don't
There's only-
see this taking, I mean, you know, what I did today took a long time, and I apologize for that, although I think you may all realize that a lot of the time was consumed because the witnesses had some fairly long-winded answers to my questions, which was fine. But I've read Mr. Schwertzinger and Mr. Ash or Dr. Ash's testimony. Does anybody think this is going to end up taking all day for
No,
direct and cross-X?
No,
Okay, I don't either. So, Ms. Meisenheimer, I certainly respect those of, I'll say, you who have small children. I used to have small children. Now I have small grandchildren, but that we certainly don't want to interfere with that if we don't have to. So let's do the understanding. We'll start at 10. Are you going to have a problem if we finish at 5, or would you like to finish earlier than that?
No, it's fine.
Okay, and if we can finish a little earlier, fine. We do have trick-or-treaters who come to our house too. And we can go Tuesday morning with Marina Coast as well if we need to. We're Tuesday afternoon is travel time for the site visit, Wednesday's the site visit, but then we have Thursday and Friday, and I'm pretty confident it's not going to take 2 days to cover Dr. Long's testimony. So we'll be able to fit it in with that. But thank you, Ms. Meisenheimer, for that clarification. So Mr. Betts, it was a good suggestion. We'll start at 10. That'll give you and Mr. Osias and Mr. Moore some time to kind of sort out the new slide numbers. And Mr. Wilkins, you can help us out rather if, oh shoot, it's going to be a big file. You probably won't be able to email it. You probably have to upload. I was going to say you could email it to everyone so they get it earlier. But I'm going to ask you to upload it before 8 o'clock. And I will ask my staff, Ms. Plunk's an early riser, and as is Ms. Mullen. I'll ask one of them to move it over into the AHO, the AHO FTP folder so it can be downloaded right after 8 o'clock on Monday morning. And that'll give CalAm 2 hours to sort out what are the new slides and so forth. Does that work?
I don't see a problem with that approach. The only issue I have is my technical know-how, and that will be the only challenge I'll have to get over.
The technical what? I'm sorry.
My technical know-how to upload things, and hopefully my secretary is leaving for Scotland and she's great. So I will have to work with my co-counsel to figure this out, and I'm confident we can.
Okay. My staff just advised me in the chat that if you convert it to PDF, and that's easy to do, I assume even you know how to do that. That's something most attorneys can do. You just click on print. The file byte, the megabyte size goes way down, as PowerPoint for some reason takes a lot of megabytes, but PDF does not. So if you can, when you have it done, convert it to PDF, see if you can email it to the AHO with CCs to all the parties. And if you can do it over the weekend, that's even better. And if you can't, then upload it and of course send us an email with CC to the parties and we'll transfer it over. But that may help the other parties get it sooner. So can you take that upon yourself to try to do that, Mr. Wilkins? I know this is lawyers trying to do technology, but
Possible I will get it done tomorrow. I can't promise that, but that will be my goal. It will definitely be before Sunday. So I will, if it will, I will try and figure out a way to get it to everybody on Sunday at some point.
yeah. And I think if you PDF, which is the format we want it in anyway, if you can do it in PDF and then email it, hopefully with CCs, hopefully everybody can get it.
That works.
Okay, so hopefully that'll help the CalAm attorneys. We still will start at 10 a.m. instead of 9 on Monday morning and go from there. So these are all good suggestions. Thank you all for your flexibility on this. Anything else for today?
Mr. Lilly, you had mentioned, I think it was on Wednesday, as part of our homework assignments from back then. You raised the issue of the return water settlement agreement, something about briefing it, which I won't address right now. But I did want to point out that Exhibit 105, which you now have and have looked through, on pages 17 to 23, there is a discussion of the return water settlement agreement. And on page 20,
I'm sorry, you rattled those off. Tell me those page numbers again.
yes, it's pages 17 to 23. And in that document, the PDF page matched the document.
Okay.
And the formula itself is the whole page on page 20.
Okay, and I'm pretty sure we do have the agreement itself is already in one of the CalAm exhibits, isn't it? I don't know if anybody knows.
I believe it's an attachment to the approval by the CPUC.
Yeah.
Okay. And that is a CalAm exhibit.
Yes.
We only have 100 exhibits. I can't believe you don't know right away which one it is.
Well, I was going to say yes right away, and then I paused.
I think I've seen it. So, and as far as the briefing goes, Mr. Osias, if I wasn't clear on that, I'm not asking for a separate briefing on that. I think it's definitely an issue that all parties will want to address in their closing briefs as far as how does the return water settlement agreement and the OWP formula in it apply? Does it apply? And if so, how does it apply to the issues that the court has referred to the State Water Board? I think that may be a fairly complicated legal question on which I would like briefing, and I suspect you all will, but you don't need to file separate briefs on that. So is that clear? I'm sorry if I wasn't clear before.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's helpful. And I just wanted to reference the document. I know that EIR is so big that I thought if we could steer you to the section.
No, frankly, I now know where to look to learn about superposition modeling approach, which was very useful and I did not understand very well before. Okay, and as soon as I can, although it may not be until sometime next week, I will get out the letter with the homework assignments and we'll specify some deadlines, but the sooner you can get that to my office, the better. Okay, good. Anything else for today, for Friday afternoon at 4:30? Oh, everybody's looking. I think I've worn you all out. All right. Well, thank you all very much. I know this is hard and contentious, and I really do appreciate the professional behaviors that all of you have exhibited and the patience with all of my questions today. So everybody have a good weekend. Tomorrow, Monday morning, 10 a.m., we will reconvene.